Have you heard of the voting rights legislation?
No! Would you like to know how it could affect your future?
Yes!
Well, you've come to the right place.
So sit back and relax and listen to our wonderful podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Sizzy McFord Show. We're your hosts,
Sizzy.
and McFord.
Today we are asking, how can we the people use the principles and ideas contained in the Constitution to help us deal with the problems our nation faces?
So first, let's inform you on what this legislation even is.
The voting rights legislation is a bill that will make voting easier and more accessible. It will make it easier to vote early, to vote mail-in, and to vote remotely. You will also be able to register to vote on Election Day.
Sounds pretty nice, right? Well, that depends on your political views.
That's right. The House of Representatives is pretty much divided on their views of this legislation. Many Democrats of the House want the voting rights to become a federal decision, which is what this legislation would do, and every Republican of the House wants the states to make their own laws on voting. The Republicans say that if this legislation is passed, there will be no other Republican elected president again. They also say that this legislation will lead to fraud.
Now, we will move on and talk about how this legislation is related to the Constitution.
So McFord, how does the voting rights legislation relate to the question we are focusing on for today's episode, which is how can we the people use the principles and ideas contained in the Constitution to help us deal with the problems our nation faces?
Well, there are many ideas from the Constitution that will relate to this topic. If the legislation is passed and turned into law, the posterity of the people will be able to use these rights, because we are ensured that this law will let us do these things.
Thank you, McFord. We will be right back, but stay tuned to learn more information on this legislation.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Sizzy McFord Show. We're your hosts, Sizzy and McFord, where we are discussing the voting rights legislation. Sizzy, would you like to take this away?
Sure.
So, Sizzy, how does the voting rights legislation impact your life, my life, and everyone in America?
So this topic impacts our lives in the United States because if this legislation is passed and turned into a law, it will impact the way we can vote because it would make it a lot easier. For example, to mail in a ballot from home would be a lot easier because voting would be the same in every state, and more ways to vote would become more accessible. Albeit, if it is not passed, voting in each state will most likely have different laws on how you should vote.
So, what do you listeners think? What do you think is better? Having the same voting rights in each state, possibly making different ways of voting less difficult? Or should we have different voting laws in each state and possibly reduce the amount of fraud in each election, making the elections fair? Well, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for listening to the Sizzy McFord Show.
Have a great day, and don't forget to tune in to our next show where we will be covering the 2020
Sizzy! We shouldn't ruin the surprise!
Whoops, you're right.
Well, in that case, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at SizzyMcFord69.
Have a great day, and again, don't forget to
Sizzy!